looked at Zoom, a bit of a beginner's look at Zoom, and this time we're jumping into the advanced session. And there is quite a lot for us to get through today, but there's also been some updates since the last time we ran Zoom Advanced, and there's some quite interesting and exciting updates, I think, around breakout rooms and some of the other things that we can do now within Zoom. So we're going to take you through a lot of that today. You can also see on Lachlan's screen that we've got some updates available. So it's a really great idea. Lachlan's now taking us through the process where you can check for updates in Zoom. They're not always pushed through immediately by the university. So it's really handy to check for updates yourself. So you can see there on the screen that Lachlan's showing us how to do that within the Zoom app. I think we call it now, Lachlan, do we?
It's a good question. Application window, yeah.
Yeah, we'll call it that.
Yeah, anyhow, that's just a quick guide. The updates from Zoom, the way that CSU's account works is that they will get pushed out to everyone's account automatically in 2 weeks, right? So they don't come out to your computer automatically once they're released. There's usually a 2-week layover where you can manually update by going into the app window, clicking on your profile image and hitting check for updates. If there's one there, you'll get this message and then it'll download and install quickly. But of course, we're in the middle of a Zoom meeting, so that's not happening for me at the moment. But yeah, that's how you can update yourself manually. Most of the time, the updates are, I'm not going to say trivial things, but let's just say that they're not majorly important and you can wait for them. But however, a few weeks ago, prior to the exams, there was an update which was pushed out and our students needed to have it on their computers. Otherwise, they couldn't log into Zoom meetings, which meant they couldn't be invigilated in their exams unless they'd updated. So it's fairly important that those updates happen regularly and quickly. So I think that 2-week layover window might be shortened in the new year. We might make some changes there. But if you want to update yourself now, you certainly can. And I will get rid of that.
Oh, while you're there, Lachlan, while you've got the, what do we call it, the Zoom application window there was, if you just click on your image again, very quickly while we're here, we'll just take a moment as well, just to very quickly show you that this is a neat way to see which account you're logged in on with Zoom. So we know that some of us go to waiting rooms or we come in as guests in Zoom. So it's a really easy way to check here. You can see that Lachlan's logged in currently under his CSU email address. So if you have a personal Zoom account outside of your CSU one, you can use it in here. You can switch accounts, you can see there as well. But it's a really neat way of just seeing which account you're currently logged in on and do you need to go back through the Charles Sturt Zoom website and log in with single sign-on. You can do it from here as well. It will take you to that location. So very handy little tip that we can do there. Thanks, Lachlan. So as I was saying before, there's quite a few things that we'll get through today, but we'll look at things like waiting rooms, which some of you came in through, some of you didn't. We'll look at Zoom recordings. We'll go back to the Zoom portal again to have a quick look at settings and recordings and a few other elements. We'll talk a little bit about the Zoom Blackboard LTI tool again. It is a new implementation that we have, so it's a really good idea to sort of get used to what that looks like and what we can do with that. We constantly get questions around taking attendance, so we're going to run you through some of the quick tips behind how you can do that. There is multiple ways, as well as looking at breakout rooms, how we can use those. Polling in Zoom, we'll look at how to do that, what it looks like, the pros and cons again. We'll also run through a little bit of screen sharing, what that looks like, and some of the key tips behind what to do. And one of those key tips will be practice, practice, practice. We'll also take a quick look at the Zoom mobile app, which some of you might already have, and a little bit also about whiteboarding and annotation, because they're quite simple tools that Zoom offer, and just how we might be able to use some of those. Again, remembering that next week we move on to having a look at Zoom in sort of the teaching and learning space. So we'll jump into looking at some other elements of Zoom with learning and teaching. But this week we'll go through some of the advanced elements.
Thanks, Prue. I think before we move on to the next slides, I'm going to drop a couple of files into the chat pod for people to have for today. The first one I'm going to put in is the LTI, the new Blackboard tool. If you haven't already got the cheat sheet on how to use the new Zoom meetings tool, which will be in all subject sites for next session and beyond, I've just added that into the chat pod. I will also find slides for today, or maybe I won't. I'll get to those once I do find them anyway. The other one to directly contrast with the LTI is the cheat sheet that everyone uses, which talks about the Zoom portal, the back end. And the two are not mutually exclusive. Basically, you need to understand the difference between the back end of the Zoom portal, which you'll continue to use, as well as the I2 Zoom integration for those of you involved in learning and teaching, because they augment each other. It's not a one or the other type equation. And yeah, I'll grab those slides while Prue goes over the waiting room detail, perhaps.
Yeah, that's excellent. Okay, thanks, Lachlan. Sorry, I was looking to try and find my download of the PDF as well, but thank you. Yeah, so we've got a bit of a refresher here on waiting rooms. So we certainly do have waiting rooms turned on for all of our Zoom meetings at CSU. So this has been something that's been done by DIT. They sit there for a range of reasons. There's a couple of tricks though. So authenticated users, so people who have come through with their single sign-on with Charles Sturt University will pass straight through the waiting room. Anyone that comes in as a guest will actually go into the waiting room, and it's up to the host or the co-host within the meeting to then allow them into the meeting room. So if you are hosting your meetings, it is a really good idea to keep your eye on your participant list. So we sort of talked last week about being organized with Zoom and having particular windows open, and one of those would be your chat window and your participant window, and just keeping an eye on that participant window. You will get a little notification if you don't have those windows open. A little notification will pop up under your participants list saying that you've got people in the waiting room, but just trying to keep an eye on it. If you came in through the waiting room, you can see that it's just sort of a dark area that you sit in waiting to be accepted into the main waiting room. So sometimes it can cause confusion if you're not quite sure why you're in a waiting room or how you got there. Also, it might be a little hint that maybe you do need to go through single sign-on as well. So just keeping an eye on those lists of people and participants and where they're going. You have some other options. Again, these are in your settings. You can have passwords to enter into your meeting rooms. These are turned off by default in your settings. We also have things like registration for a meeting. And these can be sent with login details as part of an email to students or staff or participants. Registration can be useful. It can also be problematic. Again, it goes back to email addresses and what people are signing into Zoom with. So remembering that people have multiple Zoom accounts. So yes, I think Lachlan's comment there in the chat, it can be very annoying and very frustrating if people can't get into meeting rooms. So mandatory single sign-on is turned off by default in our back end as well of Zoom. And that's, again, remembering that as a university, we're really trying to engage with people outside of CSU who don't have CSU email addresses. So we're really trying to encourage as many people to come along to Zoom meetings. Just remembering, if you are concerned about who's coming into your Zoom meetings, it is possible to kick people out of Zoom meetings. So I could kick Lachlan out if he becomes too annoying within this session. And again, it's looking at your participant list and you have an option there as well to remove people from a meeting room. You also have an ability to lock a meeting room, but again, it's thinking through why you would lock a meeting room, which just means that people can't get into the meeting room. It's not that the people have to stay there. It's really thinking about the purpose of what you're trying to do, who you're allowing into the Zoom room, and why you'd like those people there. So waiting rooms are there. It's just about getting the hang of how they work and who's moved automatically into one and who moves automatically into the meeting room. Is there anything I missed there, Lachlan?
That's pretty good. I think this business with the single sign-on is that, as Prue mentioned, the default setup is that anyone can join your meeting, but they're not going to come in past the waiting room unless they've signed in. If you turn on that SSO mandatory sign-in, no one who doesn't log in as a CSU user is getting into the room. The waiting room will effectively be nullified at that point. So that's why it's turned off. It allows us to have external presenters and other people and even students who forget logins, etc., still able to join, but it gives you oversight of who's trying to access the room. So that's why it's off by default. Anyway, recordings. I can take this one if you like, Prue. We're just doing a quick refresher on a couple of items. I'm sure a lot of you now are particularly confident users of Zoom. It's important looking in the back end that you are across your settings relating to recordings, and don't try and do it after the fact, after you've made recordings, because it won't retrospectively apply those changes. And the other part about using the Zoom portal, if we jump into charlester.zoom.us, sign into my account, and look at my recordings tab. Before I actually look at the settings, let's have a look in the recordings tab itself. You've always got the ability to locate all the Zoom recordings if you have downloaded them locally onto your computer. It's not something that we recommend by and large, but some people want local backups. This will always be, unless you've changed the destination for local recordings, it's always going to be inside your documents folder on your computer. So if you're looking for it and you're not sure where the local recordings have gone, it'll be documents, Zoom will be the subfolder. So the cloud recordings, against each recording, you have got options against the recording types. So if we open the title, depending on what your settings have been set to, which we'll look at in just a second, you should be able to see the default, which is whatever's being shared or the videos in the room, unless they're turned off. So the shared screen with the view from the speaker, so the one person that's doing the talking. You get a link, you can download it, you can delete it. Same with the audio, which will be an M4A file for the curious. You get a transcript if you've turned transcripts on, and you get the chat log as well, which will be a TXT file. So those are the types of files that you can get with every one of your recordings. When you see this button that says copy shareable link, if you're looking at that, it's going to give you the link to this one, the shared screen view with a speaker file, and the people who see that will be able to choose to download it if they want to. That's what's on by default. However, against every recording, there is also this share button up here in the top right. If you click on it, every recording also has other controls that you can toggle on and off. So if you're worried about a particular recording being accessible or otherwise, you can make some changes. By default, they're publicly available. You can toggle that off. If you want them to have an expiry date, only be visible for a certain amount, you can toggle that on. Our recordings at CSU are available in the cloud for 365 days. You've probably all seen by now somewhere that there's a counter against your recordings that talks about how many days the recording is going to be available for. By default, it's 365 days from the day you make it, and then it will be purged from the system. But before it gets to that point, you'll also receive a notification. I have a feeling it's a fortnight in advance. Prue, I could be wrong. What do you think?
I think it is a fortnight. Yep, I think you're spot on.
Yeah. You can also turn off the ability for people to download the file. If you don't want them to be able to download it, that's on by default. Same with transcript information, etc. So you can, and also turn on things like passwords, etc. for your recording. So if you want to get into all that side of things with locking down what's happening with the individual recordings, you open up the recording and click on the share button. In terms of the actual settings regarding your recordings, if you go into your settings tab and look at recording, you'll find scrolling through that list that there is a bunch of options about it. Do you want to allow for people to be able to download things? Your cloud recording settings, by default, as I said, it's the active speaker, so it's not going to show everyone in the gallery. But you can turn that on if that's what you wanted. So you can toggle those settings off and on. If you wanted timestamps to be added to your recordings, you can do that. If you want participant names, these are all the things that are off by default. So we don't have participant names visible in recordings. Yeah, so look, I'd advise, I'm not going to go through all of these. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to get through today, but what I would advise is that you go into the recording tab in your settings and have a look at what you've got turned off and on, because that will apply to every recording you make, you know, from here on. So take the time to do that for sure. Don't forget, with today's session, as always, you can drop whatever you like into the chat pod as we go, and either myself or Prue or other people in the room will respond to that. So don't feel like you have to sit back and listen to me drone on. All right. Actually, I'll go back to recordings for a second. When we want to edit recordings in Zoom, we get asked all the time about editing recordings. It is a very superficial editing that's possible in Zoom. if we go back to my recordings tab, I will open up one and show you. When the host, if you've logged into Zoom, so I've logged in, I'm going to open up one of my recordings. I'm going to open up the link to, I could use the shareable link, but I can open up the link here as well. When I open that up in a browser, it picks up that I'm the host because I'd logged into Zoom already. And what it's going to give me, once it loads, underneath we've got the option here with the scissors to be able to do what we call top and tailing. I can edit the start point and the finish point and save that if I wanted to for the recording. And that is the only change that you can make in Zoom for editing. And that applies only to people who are watching that link to the recording. If they download it locally, your changes won't affect what they've downloaded. They get the full thing. So if you're after permanent editing of sorts, you cannot do it in Zoom. You'll need to download the file, edit it in something else like CSU Replay, for example. Otherwise, it literally affects the playback range when someone clicks on the link to the recording. So what else we got? Transcripts and subtitles, etc. Those are settings that you can turn on. We looked at those. The closed captions option, you'll need to turn on in your settings area, and you will find that it will require you to manually populate it or get hold of a third-party provider. So usually the accessibility services type people are interested in closed captioning, etc. But by default, it will automatically populate the transcript. It's about 65% accurate in the chat pod. From what I've seen, Prue, has that been your experience as well?
Sorry, I'm just trying to have a think as well. So I'm just trying to, is it linked to the transcript, or is it, because I know the transcript is a downloadable file that you can then embed into the video. I think I'm confusing things though, sorry.
Yeah, well, the transcript and the chat pod text, I suppose, are both auto-populated after you finalize a recording. So it's both of them come from the same place. But yeah, it's not entirely accurate. What we usually advise is that people take the time to proof them, but if they're particularly worried about what's going in there. Yeah, it's a good question, Robin. When it's saved locally, that transcript won't be available to as part of that local recording file, which is a video file. But usually people have the option, as long as you've made transcripts available as part of your settings, you can see up here with the download aspect. For this one, it's only going to download this recording. However, if I go back to my settings, this shareable link, when people open that up, they'll have the option to choose the different types of files they want to download. They usually get all of them at once. Transcript, chat pod, recording, audio, you get all of it, whatever you've enabled. So that's what comes with the shareable link. But when we look at the I2 LTI item shortly, you'll see the difference between the back end, what's available, and what's available in the LTI. It's what's on by default after you've made those changes to your settings, Pete. It's a question about whether or not the settings are universally applied. They are until you go in and start making changes to the individual share settings for one recording. Yes, you can edit the transcript, Simone. Great question. You can go in and edit that file as well. Okay, I'll keep moving. I have to keep doing that today and reminding myself. Pros and cons very quickly about cloud versus local. By and large, people are recording by default to the cloud. That's what's set on. The students get a link, they watch it, and that might be the last that they deal with it. The cons of recording locally basically is it takes up storage space, it takes time, and you don't get, I guess, those other functions that we get with recording to the cloud. But if you want to back up your content, absolutely. You always get the option to download a local version after it's gone to the cloud. So actually, just by leaving it on as record to the cloud as your first step, there's no downside to that really. You can always choose to get a local version afterwards. switching and just saying firstly record to the local computer, you don't get the option to get it back to the cloud, to get the link back to the students. And that's a common mistake that happens. People will have chosen record to the computer, record locally by accident, and thereafter they're trying to get the recordings back into their subject sites, and it becomes a little bit clunky. So always record to the cloud and then make choices about downloading locally, unless you've got a very good reason otherwise. Okay, we'll go back to the Zoom portal quickly. We have been looking at the settings section in the back end of Zoom. The main thing to keep in mind when we go to charlessturt.zoom.us, the Zoom portal, is that this feature, the webinar request button, has been added to the portal. I'm sure most of you have been in the town halls that have been run for the university, etc. That's using the Zoom webinar tool. The main difference being that a lot of the interaction features that are part of your Zoom meetings are not available as part of webinars. It's usually a mono-directional presentation of sorts, and your only means of engaging with that usually is the Q&A pod that allows panelists. You can allocate someone to moderate the Q&A questions coming through, and it also has a larger room capacity. So that's the other part. All of you get 300 participant cap in every one of your meeting rooms. So you can have up to 300 students in there and an unlimited number of rooms. That's our license setup. You get access to the webinar tool, request a license for a particular date. That can have up to 500. In a normal webinar, we also have a super webinar, which can take up to 10,000. So it's could be 5,000. I'm going to say 10 today, but I think it's I think it's 10. There's only one of those. It costs the university a whole lot of money, and it's usually used by big ticket items, so to speak, like whole of university or whole of faculty. But it can take a whole lot more people. And that also is accessed by clicking on this webinar request form. It goes through to DIT, and then they'll send you an email with your webinar access details. It basically changes your account details and allows you to book a meeting as a webinar rather than a normal meeting. Okay, let's keep going. I'll have a look at questions for a second. Prue, do you want to start talking about the LTI a little bit, and I'll get organised?
That sounds like a good idea. So we've got the new, what we call the Zoom LTI, and basically if you're teaching, you now have access to a new area or a new tool, I guess we'll call it, within your Interact 2 site. So sorry, Lachlan, I think you're the one with the LTI tool in a subject site as an example. Not me,
that's
but
fine.
basically,
I'll open it in a sec. Yeah.
Thank you. But it does give you a different type of functionality. So in the past, we had been very quickly creating our Zoom meetings in our Zoom portal and then copying and pasting either web links or information over into our Interact 2 site so that students knew where to go and where they needed to be at the correct time. So now we've got an integrated tool. So Zoom is integrating really nicely with Blackboard or with Interact 2. And it's allowing us to set up a new way that we can show students how we're scheduling our meetings, our online classes, and where they need to be and how they need to get there, but also how they can access the recordings afterwards. So it's giving us, I guess, a third point that we can access Zoom from, which might sound a little bit confusing, but again, it's just thinking through what we can do with the LTI, what it looks like from our perspective and students as well within our Interact 2 sites. I think it has simplified things quite a lot compared to what we previously had. And hopefully it's sort of value adding for students as well, in that they know where to go and how to access information. So in the past, if you were using the template that was provided by DLT, we were copying and pasting our URLs in. We'd also need to be sending students a link to where they could find their Zoom recording later on. And although we were given a template, some people used that really well, and others, it was sort of a hodgepodge of announcements and discussion boards and all sorts of things. So I think in some ways, this new Zoom LTI tool that we have, which we'll show you in a moment, it's really sort of simplifying the process. Again, it probably has some pros and cons, which we'll talk through. So you can see this is where we are. So Lachlan's in the online meeting link, which we had in our Interact 2 sites.
That's the old one?
This is there you go, the nice old one that we had where we could put in our links to our meetings. We could put in the recording URL. It was our schedule that we had, and it worked well when we first had the rollout of Zoom. But now we've got a much nicer integration that's occurred quite recently, hasn't it, Lachlan?
Yeah, so it's been pushed out to every subject site for session 90. Both items are there, the old and the new, for this session alone. And then after that, only the LTI will be available. And basically, it creates a window directly into your Zoom account in the back end. And it allows you to create those meetings directly within the subject site and for students to be able to see everything through here. Basically, what it involves is it takes out all the manual handling of copying and pasting links or content in the content areas. So the students, when they log in here, they can see the same tabs with the exception of this personal meeting room. Very few people use the PMY in Zoom, but basically it's a permanent link to a meeting room that's just yours that you can provide to people. It's not really probably something you're going to be giving to students, and they can't see that tab. So ignore that part for today. We're going to look at upcoming, previous, and cloud recordings, because as you create meetings for a subject within the LTI, they appear in a list here for the students. So let's go through that process. I'm going to suggest in the first instance that you give the topic a fairly generic title, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to put in weekly online meeting. Don't worry about the description. It's not visible anywhere unless you go digging for it. Figure out the time for our online meeting. Okay, so I'm going to say from next Tuesday, happening at,
actually,
I don't know, 8
Lachlan,
o'clock.
I'm teaching the subject. It's Wednesday nights at 7 p.m, you know, while you're there.
Sure, I could do that. When's it start?
No, it's all right. I'll do it. I'm just joking.
Oh, okay. Are you really teaching the subject? Okay, so let's say that I'm putting it in there, 8 o'clock, starting from then. Don't worry about the duration too much. You can run it for as long as you like. Time zone by default's Eastern Daily Time, whatever it's called. Now, it's a recurring meeting. I'm going to put this on with thinking that I'm going to set this for all of my teaching weeks. It's going to happen every week. And instead of dealing with this repeat every week, I'm going to say I want it to run for 14 weeks. We do 14-week teaching sessions. We can edit this after the fact. So before anyone jumps on me and says that session 90 is shorter than all the other sessions, Lachlan, we can always edit it after the fact. Right, so I'm going to put it on for 14 weeks. No registration. Waiting rooms are on by default. I usually have video and audio as opt-in for people. So they enter the rooms and then they choose to turn things on. You might want that differently, but I leave them off. The interesting part underneath at the bottom here is whether or not you want students to be able to join the room before you. And that's important, particularly if you're going to use the automatic record function. My recommendation is that you turn off joining before you turn up and that you turn on record the meeting automatically to the cloud. At that point, every week when you have this meeting, you turn up, the recording kicks in, you don't have to remember it. The students can't join before you. And that's important with the recording because we've had instances with students joining rooms before you turn up, discussing all manner of stuff and it being recorded automatically. That at that point is a privacy issue that we have to worry about. Okay, so it's one or the other. If you want students to join the room before you and you decide when recordings are going to go on, check that enable join before host box. If, however, you want kind of the peace of mind of knowing that when you turn up week after week, the recording will kick in and they can join after you turn up, then make sure that enable join before host is off. Okay, as I said, I have everyone muted when they come in and they choose when to turn on their mics. And I don't have this authenticated users box ticked. Our waiting rooms take care of that authentication factor. So that's off. All right, so I've done that. I'm going to hit save. You'll notice that there is an advanced options section down here. Don't worry too much about this. If you're using scheduling rights and booking for other people, that's where that would be done. You cannot edit alternative hosts in this tool. The way that the LTI works is it looks at who else is enrolled in your subject. So all other full staff, marking assistants, other instructors in the subject will be given alternative host access to this room automatically. You don't have to provision any of that. Because they can get into the I2 site, they'll be able to access the Zoom room as a co-host. It's just taken care of. However, if you ever want to make any changes to the meeting and add other co-hosts or remove people, you need to jump into the back end and change those settings in the portal. Okay? So let's save it and see what happens. All right, so it's done that. It's given me a summary. So I can come in and edit this information later on, but it's created that. Now this is the first annoying part about the LTI. I can't access my nav bar in the I2 site. It's not there. So how do I get back? And that's done through these things. They're called breadcrumbs at the top. You can see the title for the subject up here. You click on that, it'll take you back into the subject. Once that opens, I can then reopen that Zoom LTI link. It's a little fiddly. Basically, you've got to get used to using the breadcrumbs to jump backwards and forwards. At the moment, it's not visible. Now, I've created those meetings, so now what the students can see is every week, every meeting, every link. It's waiting there for them. So you don't have to manually populate a schedule of times anymore. It's all done. So they see those dates, and then they're able to join those meetings. Remembering your settings, if you've allowed them not to join until you turn up, they'll be able to turn up at the time, click on that and enter the room. Once that date passes, it moves into the previous meetings tab as a record of when meetings have been held, and the list will always show the next meeting coming up. If you've made a recording inside that meeting room, it will then be visible to students inside the cloud recordings tab automatically. So no copying and pasting of recording links anymore, right? So it's taking care of the schedule. It's taking care of the recordings. It's all just available for the students. You just need to set it up once at the beginning of the session. Let's say, for example, we look at some of these weeks and we go, okay, obviously I'm not going to be teaching on the 29th of December, right? Remove the particular instances, just this occurrence, get rid of the ones that aren't applicable.
Lachlan, can any of the full teaching access, like full staff access people delete those meetings?
They can't, no. The original host is the one that needs to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so it's still, you're still the primary host as such, and they will be able to go in as co-hosts and do things within the live meeting that a co-host can normally do, but they can't edit those settings. Yeah, it's done by I suppose the main owner. But you got an option here, of course, to show meetings only the ones that you've set up. Students cannot create meetings in here. Okay, they've still got the option. All of our students have got the option to use the Zoom portal themselves and create their own rooms, which some people use for student study groups and all sorts of things. That's still available to students to do, but the LTI tool is only available for staff to make changes to. Okay, so the students get access to it, assuming that it's visible in the subject site. So let me just bring that up again. You're going to find in your subject sites that it's down the bottom and hidden, like this one. Zoom LTI and hidden, right? We want that to be visible to students. You're going to need to show the link, otherwise they won't be able to see it. And then you drag it up to wherever you want it to be. Most people have it underneath the community section, basically the Zoom rooms. So at this stage, that's the old one is there and it's visible. The new tool is hidden currently that we've been playing around in. Okay, so what I'd really recommend with the LTI, the cheat sheet that I provided before is, it's pretty good. It basically gives you the run through from woe to go of how to use this tool. We'll drop it into the chat pod again in a second. But for the students, it's a one-stop shop. They get the link, the dates, the times. After the meeting's passed, they get the recordings. You don't have to provision any of that information again. What are the downsides? We don't get to see the nav bar anymore, so you've got to get used to using the breadcrumbs to jump backwards and forwards whilst you're playing with this tool. The other downsides, we don't get transcripts made available through this tool. When the recordings are made available, and I will open an example to show you. And I'll stop for a second after I've done that to look at some of the questions, Prue. So if there are stuff going into the chat pod, which I can see there is, we'll get to that. Zoom. Let's have a look. Hopefully that's the new one, not the old one. Yep, okay. Okay, so what I want to show you is the cloud recordings tab. Right, so there's 3 recordings that have happened in here. It gives us a summary and the number of files, so I can click on any of those. And you can see it gives us a thumbnail, and we can play back the recordings directly inside the LTI, or we can choose to download. We get the video recording, we get the audio. That's it, no transcript. If you want any of those other types of files provisioned to the students, then you're going to need to go into the back end of Zoom, like we were before. Whoops. Go into your recordings area and get a hold of the individual item that you want. It's usually transcripts that people ask me about. Where are the transcripts? You've got to go into the back end, find the transcript file, and you'll need to provide those extra files to students somewhere else. You can't, there's a transcript. So I could download a transcript if I wanted students to have it, and I would provide it to them in their subject site, maybe as an announcement, maybe in the discussion board, maybe in another content area. It's not going to happen inside the Zoom folder anymore. All it does is, as we've seen with the functionality, allows you to book meetings, provide access to the recordings, the videos, etc. I'll stop there for a second, Prue.
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. There was a really great question just from Ryan. Just having a think about the LTI tool, just going back to the way that the meetings are structured there. Is there any way that we can change, sorry, when we set up a recurring meeting, is there a way that we can change the weekly title of the meeting or where it's listed as a topic?
It's a really good question, and we do get asked it regularly. Let's have a look. It's not as easy as I would like it to be, but I'll do it in here. There's always the load time as well to get used to as the LTI populates. So I've got some here coming up, for example, that are populated. If I was going to try and change the topic title through the LTI, I click on the title, and at that point, I can edit the meeting. Can't change the topic here. If I go down to edit meeting down the bottom, change the title. Okay, so you can go into each one individually and give it a specific title after you've created them. Okay, so don't invest too much time in the title when you've created your whole recurring list. Go in and edit them later on and give them your specific functions. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to create 14 individual meetings with the details you like. I'd suggest you create them all and go back and modify just that one detail. Good question. Anything else, Prue, or are we good to keep going?
There's just been a few questions as well around editing the meetings, which you're showing us now. And I think it's good to sort of remember that there's things that we can do within the LTI tool here in Blackboard, but we'll also, you'll find all of this listed within your charleston.zoom in the web portal as well. So you've got sort of the full functionality of what you would normally have been used to when creating your Zoom meetings previously. So if you ever feel like you're lost, you can always go back, as we keep saying, if you do feel lost or can't find something, go back to the web portal because that's where everything is.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You've got to be across both interfaces. Basically, you're always able to go into that charleston.zoom portal and get this layout of your meetings, which again will give you your dates and times, but that's not available to the students. That's why the LTI is useful in that you don't have to do any more of that manual provisioning of that information. You can go into all of your individual meeting details and start editing them. That's the one that we're in now currently, so I can't edit. But yeah, go in and change that detail from the back end if that's easier for you. The LTI gives you some of that functionality, but not all of it. So it's a good question, definitely. Okay, so I won't edit that at this point. The other thing that I'll say is that when you create that full list the first time of your weekly meetings for the session, the other instructors and full staff members in the subject site who I've said are going to be added as alternative hosts automatically will all get an email inviting them to the room. So when you're added as a co-host to a Zoom meeting, you get an email that says, Prue Gonzalez has invited you to this room as a co-host, etc., alternative host. That will happen automatically in the LTI once you create, I'm lost already. Once you create those new meetings. The other staff members in the subject site, the I2 subject site, will automatically be sent an email. So that might be a bit confusing for people if they didn't expect to suddenly get invited to Zoom meetings, but that's how it works. Once you schedule a new meeting, and it has other staff members in the I2 site, they'll get sent that invitation. Okay, we might move on for a bit, but please feel free to keep putting stuff into the chat pod and I'll deal with it as we go. The LTI is in all subject sites from session 90 on. The old content items layout that has you manually provisioning that information will only be visible for the 90 session. After that, it's gone. Prue, I'll hand this over to you and see what comes through.
Excellent. Yes, our perennial favourite of taking attendance. We get asked about attendance quite a lot, and it can be quite important to know who's in our meeting and who's missed out, just so that we can keep track of student learning or engagement or things like that, or if it's a staff meeting, who's attended and who has not. But there's a couple of different ways that you can do this within Zoom. So there is the quick and easy way and there is the other way, and it's just depending on how you wanted to set up your meetings is the best way, I guess, to do this. So I guess the first way is to go back through the Zoom web portal where we are now, and we can have a look at usage reports in Zoom. So it will be collecting quite a lot of information. I'll
get you to share this, sorry, Prue, because
Yep.
I've got admin view on, which is not going to be the same for everyone.
Not a problem. I'll jump in. So hopefully you're seeing my screen. I'm just sharing, I'm in the Charleston web portal here, and we can go through and have a look at usage reports which are in Zoom. So we can have a look down here on our side in the report section, and in the usage reports we've got a couple of different things that we have here, and it will set a time frame. So I'm just going to very quickly alter the time frame, so we might have some reports there to have a look at. Do a quick search. So it will run a report of every meeting that you've had. The ones that I've got here certainly are not showing a whole lot. So I'm just going to jump back another month, see if I can show you a little bit more. But I've had some very small meetings so far, but maybe what we'll see here is it gives you the information of when the meeting was. It also gives you a hyperlinked number. So this is what we want to pay attention to, of how many participants were in the room. So I'm just going to click on one at this point and it will show us a little bit about some attendance here. So it will show you who was at this meeting and the duration of time they were there, if that's useful. You can see in this case that everyone logged in using their CSU, almost everyone logged in using their CSU email address, so I know who they are. It's used their full name. For anyone that comes through as a guest, it will just come through with the name that they've logged in to Zoom with at that point in time. So it could be just about anything based on those screen names that people are using. So we have an ability to export the data from the meeting, and you'll get a very simple CSV file that you can then use for your own records, which might be handy. So you've got a good way of knowing who's there and who wasn't there. If you really need the full details of names, then it's a good idea to just keep reminding people to come through single sign-on as much as possible. Then you've got their full name and nothing else. So I guess that is one of the simple ways that we can go about having a look at participant lists and the duration of time they were there and anything else that you might need. The other option I guess you have for reports would be around if you'd set your meeting up to require registration. So if you asked people to register as part of your meeting invite, then this will be a way that you can run a list of who will actually be there and who attended. Again, it's a little bit problematic based on things like email addresses and who's logging in with what at the time. Lachlan, you've had quite a bit to do with registration and pre-registration for meetings. What have been some of the sort of issues you've found?
Look, the main one is that the registration information, whether it's a blurb or whether it's the people that are going to be alternative hosts for the meeting that's being registered for, etc. Anytime any of that information is changed, all of your registrant data is wiped, which is not handy. It's a big problem. So if you don't get it right the first time when you set up registration, you've got a problem. So it's predominantly been used when people are setting up an event with people external to CSU in mind, and they want to capture that sort of data through a form, through a sign-up process. And the uni has different mechanisms for doing that. Some of you might work with the marketing people and use a tool like Eventbrite, for example, to organize registrations. But Zoom has its own registration form. It's not massively popular because of that risk of data loss. So it's basically you're setting up a meeting, you're filling out registration information like the message people receive when they click to register. But if any of that information changes before the event itself, you lose all the data that goes in there. It sort of wipes it back to zero. So that's the biggest lurk, Prue.
If you did go through that process that Lachlan was saying, you would find that you have your registration reports here again in the report section. You can also have poll reports, and these are based on the very simple polling tool that Zoom has. So I'm just going to search through and see if I have something to show. So I do have a couple of polls here. So if you ran a poll within your meeting, it will show you the results of what that might look like. Again, it's a very simple CSV file. I'm just clicking on one to see if there was something useful there. Have a quick look at what it's showing me. You'll have a range of options again of how you create your polls. Yeah, this is a very simple poll. Hopefully you can see it's a very simple CSV file, and no matter how many, this isn't a very good example, but no matter how many questions you might have on your poll, it will just run them in a long line through a very simple CSV file. You might want to manipulate that yourself later in Excel or something else that you might like to use, but it is there as a tool again, depending on how you're using the polling tool and what you'd like to get out of that. So there's some of the reports that you can get. It's there. It's quite simple to use. When you're thinking about wanting to take registration, it's just having a think about why you need, attendance, why you need attendance and how you think that might need to look for your own purposes. So we all use it in quite a different way. Was there anything else, do you think, Lachlan, in having a think about attendance or polling while we're here?
No, not really. People predominantly use the usage report, as you said, get the number of attendees and get the names that way, and that's it. The actual polling tool itself, whether used as a teaching tool or for attendance, is less than stellar, and most people will find a third-party tool to use for engagement that gives you better data or a better type of activity, like Mentimeter that a lot of people are using inside their meetings. And next week's session, the Learning and Teaching Focus session, will actually have a play with a number of those tools that allow you to engage audience members more. The polling tool in Zoom is very easy to use. It's just not particularly functional if you're looking for anything other than multiple choice, multiple answer, quick on the spot type questions. It's pretty simple. I expect it to get better though. Zoom's putting a lot of money into its tool set because of obviously maybe its share price, I don't know, but it's hugely popular. And so they will keep developing the tool set. So we might, I guess, move on at this point to breakout rooms because we're fast approaching time, Prue.
We are fast approaching time. So very quickly, we'll sort of talk briefly about breakout rooms, and we do talk about them a little bit more, I think, next week as well. Some people have been using breakout rooms probably in this meeting already. They do take a little bit of practice to get the hang of, that's for sure. But you also need to make sure that you've got them turned on in the settings here. So I'm just going to scroll down. I honestly cannot remember whereabouts they show up in our settings. So I'm sorry if I'm making anyone a little bit seasick as I'm scrolling through. Lachlan, can you remember where they are in Meeting Basic, Meeting Advanced?
Maybe just, there's breakouts right there.
Breakout rooms, there we go. So I do have them turned on, which allows the host to split people up into smaller rooms within the one meeting. So there's a few different things that we can do there. Make sure that they're turned on in the background. If we go through, I don't think I've got the opportunity to open any breakout rooms. Can you do that at all, Lachlan, from your end? And then I could at least show you what it looks like. We've got some different options now. Zoom's had a couple of updates in that now we can assign students either automatically, and that would be through when you create your meeting invite. We can assign students to breakout rooms manually. So during the meeting, we can open up the pad to create some breakout rooms. One of the greatest new updates that Zoom has is that now we can create some breakout rooms and students or participants can choose which room they want to go to. So giving them choice in which room and why. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week and how you might be able to create different types of breakout rooms for different types of student uses, and they can choose to go to which one. It's a really good sort of learning and teaching opportunity that we have there.
I'll just share and go through the breakout process, sorry, instead of
excellent. Thank you.
getting distracted in the chat pod for a second.
Excellent. So yeah, breakout rooms are really, really useful. It's just sort of thinking about how you want to use them. And they also add a little bit of time, I think. So when you're organizing breakout rooms, you almost, or you want to use them in a session, you almost need to sort of factor in an extra amount of time, just I suppose for the admin side. So Lachlan's showing us through what that looks like now.
Yeah, okay, so look, I'm sorry for the window within a window and all of the shared gallery view stuff going on. We just put up with that for a second. When I click on breakouts to create them, choose the number that we're going to create. If you want to assign automatically, it's going to throw everyone into a room when we launch them. The last option, which is a new feature that's been added in the last month or two, it allows the participants to choose which breakouts they want to join. Now, if you consider that you can launch these breakouts and let them sit there in the background, that's what I'm going to do this time around. I'm going to create. At that point, I can also rename them into various different things, etc. Name the rooms for different purposes. We then get options to do with the rooms. Do we want them to be able to choose them? That's toggleable again there. Do you want them to be able to jump in and out? That's toggled on at the moment. This will move them all in there when we launch them. You get a timer, how long you want the breakout rooms to run. So if you want them to be on for an extended period of time, obviously make it longer, otherwise they'll close. There is a countdown that happens with the breakout rooms. Maybe 60 seconds is too long if you wanted it to be 30 seconds or something. Anyway, there's a few settings associated with breakouts. There are 3 stages of breakout room status, I suppose. This is pre-creation, and when we launch them, they're now active and people will have been sent invitations inside this meeting to go and join rooms. You can jump into them if you like, and I would keep tabs on those things up here in my participant list. As that number starts to drop, it'll be telling me that people are moving into breakouts. Okay. At the moment, they're currently unassigned. So you've got the choice as a participant at the moment to move into breakout rooms because I put that option of letting participants join on. If you turn that off and you're manually assigning, and moving them into rooms, they would actually only have the choice to go into the particular breakout rooms that you'd assign them to. If we see the drop down, I can see the numbers starting to go down a little bit. People are jumping into different rooms. You can use the drop down to reveal who's in there. So someone's moved in, Joan's gone into one, and now she's moved back. So they've jumped backwards and forwards. Thank you for demonstrating that. So you'll see that choice for participants to join rooms is quite powerful, but you want to set up the rooms for specific purposes and think about the timings. If you want complete control over them, how they run, who's going into them, etc., all of that needs to happen in that pre-creation stage, because you can't edit how the rooms function whilst they're active. Okay, so that's the other point. Sorry, Prue. Yeah. Okay, you also have the option to use a broadcast message, which will send it out to everyone in all the rooms. And that's usually used for things like, you know, we'll close the rooms in 5 minutes, or don't forget to do X, Y, Z. There are lots and lots of different scenarios for breakouts. And as Prue said, we're going to explore those in more detail next week. We'll run some activities in breakouts and go through some of those scenarios. But they are It's a particularly powerful tool. You just need to think about the logistics of the activity that you're going to run when you use breakouts. And now that people have the choice for which breakouts they go into and when, it means you can start building teaching activities around that idea. So maybe there are stages. Maybe you only move into a certain room at a certain time once you've done something else. You can actually start building teaching activities around the prospect that participants have choice about when and how they use things as well. All right, I'm going to close all the rooms. At that point, this summary is brought back to me about the rooms that exist at the moment. I can add additional rooms. Let's say I don't have enough. I can still rename them. I can delete existing rooms. I can go back to assigning people to other rooms. It's a bit of legwork involved if they're not choosing themselves when and if they go into things. So obviously the size of your cohorts is going to have an impact. I can also recreate my breakouts, which is going to wipe the floor and allow me to decide how my breakouts are going to be used again. So that's what I mean. This is sort of a middle stage that allows you to edit the existing setup. There's the active stage once you've launched all the rooms and the breakouts are open. And there's that pre-creation, that initial stage of where you're establishing what your breakouts look like. Okay, so that's the thing to get familiar with breakouts. Prue, I'll stop sharing my screen at that point and let you kick back in if you like.
Yeah, thank you. So breakout rooms are really useful, but I think like with most things with Zoom, it's practice, practice, practice. So set your own, Zoom room up and have a go at playing around with what the settings are in the breakout room. You don't need anyone else there just to go through the settings and have a look. If you need extra people, pull in your friends and your family or log in yourself on an extra device, and you'll be able to have a look at all the different sort of functionalities that breakout rooms have. A little bit on screen sharing as well. Again, this is another one about practice, practice, practice with screen sharing, and I still get it a little bit wrong every now and then. So when we're screen sharing, Zoom is all about screen sharing and what it is that you want to be sharing at the time. So more often than not, I will share an entire screen, which means that I can pull different applications or elements into it. So you can see Lachlan is sharing his entire screen there. And came up with a little coloured rectangle. So we could see that you do have options to select particular apps. So it might be that you just want to share PowerPoint. You can lock it into that. The most flexible way to do that is to do just a full screen share, but you can see we've got a whole range of different types of things. It pulls up everything you've basically got open and says, do you want to share this? So you can go through, and again, this is where you'll access things like your whiteboard, which we'll look at in a moment. If you have an iPhone or iPad nearby, you can go off that. There's also a couple of key elements though. If you want to share your computer sound, you'll need to turn that on here. So this is the one I always forget. Lachlan doesn't forget. He's got it on. So down the little bottom of the screen in the left corner, there's the share computer sound. So turn that on if you want to be sharing anything. Otherwise, you'll get lots of comments saying students or participants can't hear anything. If you wanted to show a video clip, there's also the optimize the screen sharing for video clip. And that is another useful one to turn on if you're going to share something that students need to watch. So there's a couple of real key things there when it's sharing screens, and you'll get the hang of it as you go through, or you'll forget things like me and continuously have students tell you what you need to do. Students are really good at sharing screens in Zoom now, so they'll often tell you how to do things. So there's a couple of different things there. Again, you've got a couple of different tabs. There's the basic, we're now on the advanced tab. There's a whole range of things where you might just want to share a portion of your screen. So say you're on a laptop with one single screen, perhaps you just want to show a portion of that because you'll have other elements open around it. That's a really nice way that you can do that. You can sort of make one area that's public and the rest of your single screen might be private for only you. You might just want to share music. So that's how Lachlan does this. I'm guessing at the beginning of our sessions, you just clicking in the advanced section, you might just want to share music or computer sound only. So again, you've got some music playing as students or participants are coming in. We can also share content from a second camera. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail next week as well. It may be document cameras, it may be logging in elsewhere. There's all sorts of options that we have here. So lots of things we can do there as well. You can set PowerPoint as a virtual background. So that sounds exciting as well. Lots of new updates.
I'll stop sharing for a second. Yeah, as Prue mentioned, look, we absolutely are going to go into more detail next week into some of the learning and teaching applications of Zoom. But as always, once we start getting into the many options of Zoom, we run over a little bit. So the other things today that we probably won't get time to look at in detail this week, but we will visit next week, are to do with using the Zoom mobile app. And the fact that a lot of your students will be joining meetings using the Zoom mobile app. So it's important that you understand how that interface works. And the other aspect is using whiteboards and annotation. And we did have a point in the chat pod earlier about lines appearing on shared content. And that's always because annotation has been left on or not disabled and students have started squiggling all over your pages. Yeah, annotation, it's you either love it or you hate it, but you're going to find at some point that people start marking up what you're doing, and that might be part of your intention. But by and large, it's worth remembering that if stuff starts appearing on your screen and you didn't put it there, it's to do with annotation. So look, we will hang around for a little while if people have got particular questions, etc., they want to put to us. But do keep in mind that next week's session on learning and teaching, we do look specifically at things like document cameras, teaching strategies, third-party tools for engagement like Mentimeter and Kahoot. And I'm sure we looked at another one. I can't remember what it is, Prue, but anyway, we'll be doing that next week. Same time, same channel. But we do wish all of you a happy week ahead, post-exams, etc. So that's it from us. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. That's great. Thanks, Lachlan. Lots of questions still coming in. Can we show the whiteboard, Lachlan?
Absolutely.